The stagecoach rattled over the rutted trail, each bump sending pain shooting through Nora Lawton's bruised ribs. She gripped the worn leather seat, knuckles white, as the Arizona Territory stretched endlessly before her, a vast, unforgiving expanse of dust and desperation that matched the emptiness in her heart. Montana, 1885. That's where her journey had begun 2 weeks prior, fleeing from the hands of a man who'd promised her safety in marriage but delivered only suffering. Now, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape, Nora wondered if she'd merely traded one nightmare for another. "Oatman ahead, miss," the driver called back, his gruff voice barely audible over the creaking wagon. "Your intended should be waiting at the station." Nora adjusted the high collar of her worn dress, making sure it covered the yellowing bruises on her neck. Her intended, a stranger who'd answered her desperate advertisement in the matrimonial news. A rancher named Abel Lancaster who needed a wife and had paid her passage west. Another man to own her. The small mining town of Oatman, Arizona Territory, appeared like a mirage on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to existence against the mountainside. Nora's stomach tightened as the stagecoach slowed. Her new prison. "Last stop, Oatman," the driver announced as they pulled to a halt before a dusty building with a wooden sign reading Oatman Stage Station. A cluster of men stood waiting, eyes scanning the coach with undisguised interest. Nora shrank back against the seat. "Madam." The driver opened the door, extending a weathered hand. "Need help down?" Taking a deep breath that sent pain through her injured ribs, Nora accepted his hand and stepped carefully onto Arizona soil. Her legs trembled beneath her simple blue traveling dress, partly from the long journey, partly from fear. "Which one of you is Lancaster?" the driver called, retrieving Nora's small trunk from the back of the coach. A tall man stepped forward from the small gathering. Nora's heart sank. He was older than she'd expected, perhaps 50, with hard lines etched around cold eyes. He looked her over with the same assessing gaze one might give livestock at auction. "That'd be me." His voice was as rough as the terrain. "So you're the woman?" Not a question, but a statement of ownership that made Nora's skin crawl. Before she could respond, another man stepped forward. Younger, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin visible beneath a dust-covered tan shirt. His hat was pulled low, but she could see kind eyes regarding her with concern. "Lancaster, you sure this is your bride? Telegram said to expect her next week." The younger man's voice carried a gentle authority that made Lancaster scowl. "Mind your business, Abbott." Lancaster reached for Nora's arm. "Come along, woman, got a long ride to the ranch." The younger man, Abbott, stepped between them. "She looks half dead from the journey. Might be best to let her rest at the hotel tonight. Paid good money for her passage. She'll come home with me now." Lancaster's fingers dug into Nora's arm, finding the exact spot where similar bruises were still healing. She couldn't suppress her wince. Abbott's expression hardened. "Miss, are you all right?" For the first time since arriving, someone was asking what she wanted. The novelty of it struck Nora speechless. "She's fine," Lancaster answered for her. "Just tired from the trip. I was asking the lady." Abbott turned his gaze fully to Nora, and she found herself looking into eyes the color of a summer sky. "Madam." Something in his gentle tone broke through the wall of fear she'd built around herself. I could use some rest before traveling further," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Lancaster's grip tightened painfully. "You'll rest at my place." "Let her go, Lancaster." Abbott's voice carried a warning now. "Sheriff Thompson's right over there, and I don't think he'd take kindly to seeing you manhandle a lady fresh off the stage." A tense moment passed, the air between the men crackling with unspoken threats. Finally, Lancaster released her arm with a muttered curse. "Fine, hotel tonight, I'll be by at first light." He jabbed a finger toward Nora. "Don't get any ideas about running off. I paid for you fair and square." As Lancaster stalked away, Nora fought against the trembling that threatened to overtake her body. She'd escaped one monster only to be delivered to another. "Madam." Abbott removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair and a face that was handsome despite the trail dust. "Abel Lancaster isn't known for his gentle nature. If you'd permit me to speak plainly, you might want to consider your options before morning." "I don't have options," Nora replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I signed a contract. He paid my way here." Abbott nodded toward her trunk. "May I help you to the hotel? It's just down the street." Too exhausted to refuse, Nora nodded. As they walked slowly down Oatman's Main Street, she felt the stares of the townspeople. A mail-order bride was nothing unusual in these parts, but something about her clearly invited speculation. "I'm Andrew Abbott," he said as they approached a 2-story wooden building with Oatman Hotel painted on its facade. "Most folks call me Drew. I run the White Creek Ranch about 5 miles west of town." "Nora Lawton," she replied, the name still unfamiliar on her tongue. She'd abandoned her married name when she fled Montana, returning to her maiden name despite the risk it posed if her husband ever came looking. Inside the hotel, a plump woman with graying hair greeted them with a smile that faltered when she saw Nora's condition. "Oh, you poor dear. You must be the bride Lancaster's been boasting about." "She needs rest, Mrs. Parker," Drew said, "and perhaps some hot food, of course." Mrs. Parker's eyes were kind but knowing as they assessed Nora. "We have a nice room at the back, quieter there." Drew set down her trunk. "Lancaster will be by at dawn to collect her." Something passed between Drew and the hotel keeper, an unspoken communication that Nora couldn't decipher. "I understand," Mrs. Parker said. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mr. Abbott. I'll make sure she's comfortable." Drew turned to Nora, his expression serious. "Miss Lawton, I hope you find what you're looking for in Oatman, and if you ever need assistance." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Well, White Creek Ranch isn't hard to find." After he left, Mrs. Parker led Nora upstairs to a small but clean room with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the mountains. "Lancaster's a mean one," the older woman said bluntly once the door was closed. "Went through 2 wives already. Neither lasted long." The confirmation of what Nora had already sensed settled like lead in her stomach. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted. Mrs. Parker patted her hand. "There's always somewhere to go, child. Rest now. I'll bring up some stew." Alone in the room, Nora sank onto the bed, her body aching from the journey and her mind racing with limited options. She could try to flee, but to where? With what money? Lancaster would surely hunt her down, claiming breach of contract, and the ghost of her past in Montana still loomed large. As darkness fell over Oatman, Nora washed her face in the basin provided, wincing at her reflection. The bruises on her neck were fading, but the haunted look in her eyes remained. Mrs. Parker brought a tray of stew and cornbread along with a pot of tea, her kindness almost more than Nora could bear after months of cruelty. "Thank you," Nora whispered. "Try to sleep," Mrs. Parker advised. "Morning often brings clearer thinking." But sleep eluded Nora. She sat by the window instead, watching as Oatman's few lamps were extinguished one by one. The town fell silent except for occasional bursts of laughter from the saloon down the street. In the stillness, her thoughts turned to Drew Abbott and the concern in his eyes. In another life, perhaps she might have hoped for a man like him, strong but gentle, with kindness in his gaze. Such thoughts were dangerous luxuries she couldn't afford. By sunrise, she would belong to Abel Lancaster. The contract she'd signed in desperation now bound her to another violent man. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. A soft knock at her door startled her from her reverie. Cautiously, she approached. "Who is it?" "Mrs. Parker, dear. May I come in?" Nora opened the door to find the hotel keeper holding a bundle of clothing and a determined expression. "There's not much time to explain," Mrs. Parker said, entering and closing the door behind her. Drew Abbott sent word. "Lancaster's been drinking at the Dusty Boot Saloon, boasting about how he'll break in his new bride come morning. Drew's offering you sanctuary at White Creek." Hope and fear warred within Nora. "But the contract, a contract signed under duress, isn't worth the paper it's written on," Mrs. Parker replied firmly. "And no decent judge would enforce it once they learn of Lancaster's reputation. Now, can you ride?" "Yes, but then change into these." She handed Nora the bundle, a simple shirt, trousers, and a hat. "Drew's waiting with horses at the back of the hotel. You have about 20 minutes before Lancaster's likely to stumble out of that saloon." Nora's hands trembled as she took the clothes. "Why would Mr. Abbott risk helping me?" "He doesn't know me." Mrs. Parker's expression softened. "That young man has been fighting his own battles against men like Lancaster for years. Some wounds don't show on the outside." She moved toward the door. "I'll wait in the hall. Be quick now." Left alone, Nora stared at the clothes in her hands. This was madness fleeing from one stranger to another. And yet, the alternative was unthinkable. With shaking fingers, she changed into the men's clothing, which hung loose on her frame but would serve for riding. She bundled her few possessions into a small sack, leaving the trunk behind. When she opened the door, Mrs. Parker nodded approvingly. "Tuck your hair up under that hat. From a distance, you could pass for a young man." They descended the back stairs silently, emerging into the cool night air. True to Mrs. Parker's word, Drew Abbott waited with 2 horses, his expression grim but determined. "Miss Lawton," he acknowledged with a nod. "I apologize for the urgency, but Lancaster's in a dangerous mood tonight. Why are you doing this?" Nora asked, needing to understand before she placed her trust in yet another man. Drew met her gaze steadily. "Because no one deserves to be treated as property, and because I've seen what happens to women in Lancaster's care." He extended his hand. "I'm offering you shelter, nothing more. You'll be safe at White Creek until we can figure out a better solution." Mrs. Parker pressed something into Nora's palm, a small Derringer pistol. "Just in case," she whispered. With Drew's help, Nora mounted the horse, a steady mare that seemed unbothered by her inexpert handling. As they prepared to depart, a shout from the direction of the saloon froze her blood. "That'll be Lancaster," Drew said quietly. "We need to move." They rode out of town at a steady pace, not galloping, which would attract attention, but moving with purpose. Only when Oatman's lights had disappeared behind them did Drew urge their horses to a faster pace. The desert night was alive with sounds: coyotes calling in the distance, the whisper of wind through scrub brush, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. "It's about an hour to White Creek," Drew explained as they rode. "Lancaster might suspect my involvement, but he won't come alone if he does. He's a coward at heart." Nora nodded, focusing on staying seated as they navigated the rough terrain. The men's clothing felt strange against her skin, but there was a curious freedom in the trousers that her heavy skirts had never allowed. "I don't know how to thank you," she said finally, raising her voice slightly to be heard. Drew glanced over at her. "No thanks needed. I only wish someone had been there to help my sister when she needed it." The simple statement explained much about his willingness to aid a stranger. Nora fell silent, sensing a story there that wasn't hers to ask about. They rode without further conversation, the vast starlit sky stretching endlessly above them. For the first time since fleeing Montana, Nora felt something other than fear, a tentative hope that perhaps she hadn't merely exchanged one prison for another. White Creek Ranch emerged from the darkness like a sanctuary, a cluster of well-maintained buildings, nestled in a small valley where a creek cut through the parched landscape. A lantern burned in the window of the main house, a two-story structure built of sturdy logs. As they approached, the front door opened and an older Mexican woman hurried out, her expression concerned. "Senor Drew, you found her?" "Yes, Rosa. This is Miss Lawton," Drew replied, dismounting and moving to help Nora from her horse. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Rosa's dark eyes took in Nora's disguise and the exhaustion evident in her posture. "Come inside, Nina. You look dead on your feet." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, clean and well-ordered, with simple but good quality furnishings. A fire burned in the stone hearth, chasing away the desert night's chill. "Rosa Mendez is my housekeeper and the finest cook in the Arizona Territory," Drew explained as he removed his hat and gun belt. "She's prepared the guest room for you." I don't want to impose," Nora began, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was alone in a stranger's home, miles from town, dressed in men's clothing and fleeing from a legal obligation. "It is no imposition," Rosa assured her firmly. "Now come. You need rest and tomorrow a proper bath. The men's quarters are on the other side of the house. You will have privacy." Too exhausted to argue, Nora allowed herself to be led to a small but comfortable bedroom on the second floor. Rosa provided a nightgown, promising to find more suitable clothing in the morning. Left alone, Nora sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. She should have been terrified, and part of her was, but mostly she felt a profound relief. Whatever tomorrow brought, at least she had escaped Abel Lancaster. She slept deeply for the first time in months. Morning came with the scent of coffee and bacon drifting up from below. Nora dressed again in the men's clothing, having nothing else, and made her way downstairs cautiously. She found Drew at the kitchen table, papers spread before him while Rosa worked at the stove. "Good morning, Miss Lawton," Drew said, rising as she entered. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted. "Thank you again for your kindness." Sit," Rosa instructed, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before an empty chair. "You are too thin. Men do not appreciate skin and bones." Drew smiled apologetically. "Rosa believes feeding people is the solution to most problems." "In my experience, it often is," the older woman replied, placing a cup of coffee beside Nora's plate. As they ate, Drew explained the workings of the ranch, the cattle operation that was his primary business, the horses he bred and trained, the small crew of cowhands who worked for him. None of the men lived in the main house. They had their own bunkhouse near the corral. "They're good men," he assured her, "but I've told them only that we have a guest who values her privacy. They won't bother you. How long can I stay?" Nora asked, the question that had been foremost in her mind. Drew met her gaze evenly. "As long as you need to. White Creek is remote enough that Lancaster won't find you easily, and if he does, he'll have me and my men to deal with. I can't impose indefinitely. I need to find work, make my own way." "Do you have family you could return to?" Nora shook her head. "My parents are dead. I have an aunt in Boston, but—" She trailed off, not wanting to explain that her aunt had been the one to arrange her first disastrous marriage, believing she was doing Nora a favor. "Then don't worry about the future just yet," Drew advised. "Rest, heal, and we'll figure out the next steps when you're stronger." Over the following days, Nora found herself settling into life at White Creek Ranch. Rosa provided her with several simple dresses and necessary toiletries. Drew was often busy with ranch work, but he made time each evening to check on her, their conversations growing easier as Nora's initial wariness began to fade. A week after her arrival, they received word from Mrs. Parker that Lancaster had indeed come looking for Nora at dawn, as promised. Finding her gone, he'd raged through the hotel, demanding answers that no one provided. He'd visited the sheriff, claiming theft and breach of contract, but without proof of Drew's involvement, there was little the law could do. "He's still searching," Drew told Nora as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "But he's looking for a woman traveling alone. No one suspects you're here." "What happens when he does suspect?" Nora asked, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Drew's expression hardened slightly. "Let me worry about Lancaster. I don't want you to face trouble because of me." "Trouble and I are old acquaintances," he replied with a slight smile. "Besides, I meant what I said that first night. You're not property to be bought and sold, regardless of what papers you signed." Something in his quiet conviction touched Nora deeply. She studied his profile in the fading light, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the way his brow furrowed slightly when he was thinking. In the weeks she'd known him, she'd never once seen him raise his voice in anger or make a threatening gesture, even when one of the hands had accidentally let a prized calf escape. "Tell me about your sister," she found herself asking. "You mentioned her the night we rode here." Drew was silent for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Her name was Alice. She married young to a man who seemed respectable enough, a merchant from Tucson. Turned out his respectability was just a mask he wore in public." He paused, his hands gripping the porch railing. "By the time I discovered what was happening, she'd endured 2 years of his abuse. I wanted to bring her here to safety, but she was afraid. Afraid of him, afraid of the scandal, afraid of being a burden." Nora's throat tightened with recognition of that particular fear. "What happened to her?" He pushed her down a flight of stairs during an argument, claimed it was an accident. The bitterness in Drew's voice was raw. "The local judge, a drinking buddy of his, ruled it a tragic mishap. No charges filed." "I'm so sorry," Nora whispered. "It was 5 years ago. I bought this ranch afterward, needed to get away from Tucson and the memories there." He turned to face her fully. "When I saw you step off that stagecoach, looking exactly as Alice had the last time I saw her, terrified but trying to hide it, I couldn't stand by and let history repeat itself." Understanding bloomed within Nora. Drew's kindness wasn't born of romantic interest or ulterior motives, but from a brother's lingering guilt and grief. Somehow, that made his help easier to accept. "Thank you for telling me," she said, "and for seeing what I was trying to hide." Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Nora felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. Confused by the feeling, she looked away first. "It's getting chilly," Drew observed, ever the gentleman. "We should head inside." The routine of ranch life proved therapeutic for Nora. She began helping Rosa with household tasks, learned to make tortillas under the older woman's patient instruction, and even assisted with caring for the kitchen garden. The work kept her mind occupied and her body too tired to lie awake worrying about the future. Drew respected her privacy, but made sure she was included in the small pleasures of ranch life: sunset rides along the creek, Sunday dinners with the hands, evenings spent reading from his surprisingly extensive library. He never pressed for details about her past, though she sensed he had questions. 3 weeks after her arrival at White Creek, Rosa announced she needed supplies from town and that Nora would accompany her, disguised once again in men's clothing with her hair tucked beneath a hat. "It is not good to hide forever," the housekeeper declared. Besides, we need fabric for proper dresses. These old things of mine do not fit you well." Drew was hesitant but eventually agreed, providing them with his buckboard and a list of ranch supplies to collect along with Rosa's household needs. "Stay close to Rosa," he instructed as he helped them into the wagon. "Lancaster sometimes drinks at the Dusty Boot in the afternoons." The trip to Oatman was nerve-wracking for Nora, but necessary. She couldn't remain hidden at White Creek indefinitely, and the confinement, however comfortable, was beginning to wear on her. Besides, she was curious about the town she'd glimpsed only briefly on her arrival. Oatman was busier than she remembered, the main street filled with wagons and riders. Rosa drove directly to the general store, where the owner greeted them with friendly curiosity. "This is my nephew," Rosa lied smoothly when he inquired about Nora. "Visiting from Tucson. Very shy, this one." They worked efficiently through their shopping list, Nora keeping her head down and speaking only when necessary in a deliberately lowered voice. They were just loading their purchases into the buckboard when a familiar figure emerged from the saloon across the street. Abel Lancaster. Nora froze, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain Rosa must hear it. Lancaster paused on the boardwalk speaking to another man. He hadn't noticed them yet. "Get in the wagon," Rosa said quietly. "Keep your hat low." With trembling hands, Nora climbed up, placing herself on the far side where Lancaster would be less likely to see her face. Rosa finished securing their packages with deliberate calm before joining her. They were just pulling away when Lancaster looked in their direction. For a terrible moment, Nora thought he'd recognized her despite the disguise. He took a step toward the street, his eyes narrowing. But then someone called his name from inside the saloon, and he turned away. Rosa flicked the reins, and the horses moved forward, taking them out of town at a pace that wouldn't attract attention but couldn't be called leisurely either. Only when Oatman was well behind them did Nora release the breath she'd been holding. "That was too close," she whispered. Rosa nodded grimly. "The man is like a bad weed that will not die, still looking for you, it seems." The encounter left Nora shaken. Lancaster's persistence suggested he wouldn't simply give up and find another mail-order bride. Whether it was the money he'd spent or his wounded pride driving him, he clearly intended to find her. Upon their return to White Creek, Drew listened to their account with growing concern. "Perhaps it's time to consider moving on," he said finally. "I have friends in California who could help you start fresh where Lancaster would never find you." The suggestion, though practical, filled Nora with unexpected sadness. The thought of leaving White Creek, leaving Drew, was more painful than it should have been after just 3 weeks. "Is that what you want?" she asked, searching his face for clues to his thoughts. "What I want doesn't matter," Drew replied carefully. "Your safety is what's important." "It matters to me," Nora insisted, a new boldness in her voice. Something flickered in Drew's eyes, a warmth that made her breath catch. "Then no, it's not what I want, but I won't keep you here out of selfishness if Lancaster is closing in." Rosa, who had been quietly unpacking their purchases, snorted. "The girl is safer here with us than running again." "Lancaster is looking for a woman alone, not a man's wife." The implication hung in the air between them. Nora felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Rosa," Drew said warningly, "bah, you two dance around each other like shy children." The housekeeper waved a dismissive hand. "I am going to start dinner." She departed for the kitchen, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. "I apologize for Rosa's directness," Drew said after a moment. "She has strong opinions." "She means well," Nora replied softly. "And she's not entirely wrong. Lancaster would stop looking if he believed I was already married." Drew studied her face carefully. "That would be a deception." One that might keep us both safe, Nora pointed out. A temporary solution, at least. Is that what you want? A marriage of convenience? The question struck at the heart of feelings Nora had been trying to ignore. In the weeks she'd spent at White Creek, her gratitude toward Drew had evolved into something deeper. She'd found herself watching for him whenever he was away from the house, treasuring their evening conversations, noticing the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face. But she'd been wrong about a man once before, with devastating consequences. And Drew had made no declaration of romantic interest, his kindness born of compassion rather than attraction. "I want to stop running," she said finally. "I want to feel safe again. And—" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "I've come to care for you, Drew. More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances." The confession hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Drew's expression was unreadable for a long moment, and Nora feared she'd misstepped catastrophically. Then he closed the distance between them, taking her hands gently in his. "I've been fighting my feelings since the day you arrived," he admitted. "It seemed wrong to speak of them when you were vulnerable, dependent on my help. I didn't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated," Nora assured him, her heart racing at his touch. "I feel seen, for the first time in my life." Drew's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the simple touch sending warmth through her entire body. "If we do this, if we marry, it wouldn't be just for show, not for me. You should know that." "Nor for me," Nora whispered. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then perhaps Rosa isn't as meddlesome as she appears." The decision made, they moved quickly. Drew rode into Oatman the next morning to speak with the minister and to file the necessary papers at the county office. He returned with news that surprised them both. "Lancaster left town yesterday," he reported. "Apparently, he's decided to try his luck in Prescott. Word is he's given up on finding you and is already corresponding with another potential bride." Relief washed over Nora, but it didn't change her mind about marrying Drew. What had begun as a practical solution had revealed itself as the desire of her heart. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at White Creek, with Rosa and Drew's ranch hands as witnesses. Nora wore a new dress made from fabric purchased during their trip to town, her hair adorned with wildflowers Rosa had gathered that morning. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Drew kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. It was a beginning she could never have imagined when she stepped off the stagecoach in Oatman a month earlier. That night, as they stood in the bedroom that would now be theirs together, Nora found herself trembling with nervousness. Her only experience with marriage had been one of pain and degradation. Drew seemed to understand without being told. "We have all the time in the world," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Nothing happens tonight that you don't want." "I do want you," Nora admitted. "I'm just afraid." Drew took her hands in his. "Nora Abbott," he said, using her new name with obvious pleasure. "You'll know only kindness now. That's my promise to you, for as long as we both live." The words, so similar to what she desperately needed to hear when she arrived in Arizona, broke through the last of her defenses. She stepped into his embrace, finding in his arms the safety and acceptance she'd thought forever beyond her reach. Their wedding night was a revelation for Nora. Where she had known only brutality, Drew showed her gentleness. Where she had experienced pain, he offered pleasure. By morning, the shadows in her eyes had been replaced by a glow that made Rosa smile knowingly when they finally emerged for breakfast. Life at White Creek settled into a new rhythm. Nora took on the role of rancher's wife with determination, learning the business side of the cattle operation from Drew and expanding the kitchen garden under Rosa's guidance. The hands treated her with respect, quickly growing protective of their boss's bride. 3 months after their wedding, a letter arrived from Mrs. Parker at the Oatman Hotel. Abel Lancaster's newest bride had arrived from back east, she wrote, a young woman who had immediately shown more spirit than Lancaster anticipated. After less than a week, she had publicly denounced him in the Dusty Boot Saloon and taken a position as a schoolteacher in Prescott instead. Lancaster, humiliated, had packed his belongings and headed to New Mexico territory. "Good riddance," Drew said when Nora read him the letter. "And good for her." Nora nodded, relief washing over her. Lancaster's departure removed the last shadow from her happiness. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" "Not if he's smart." Drew pulled her into his arms. "But if he does, he'll find a very different Nora Abbott than the frightened woman who arrived on that stage coach." It was true. The months at White Creek had transformed her, both inside and out. Regular meals and hard work had filled out her once gaunt frame. The bruises had long since faded, along with the haunted look in her eyes. She stood straighter now, spoke more confidently, and had even learned to ride astride like a proper rancher's wife. More important were the inner changes. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long had given way to a sense of security. She no longer flinched at sudden movements or apologized for expressing her opinions. In Drew's love, she had found the strength that had always been within her, waiting to be awakened. 6 months into their marriage, Nora realized she was with child. The news filled her with both joy and trepidation. Her own mother had died in childbirth, a fact that had haunted Nora since girlhood. "We'll hire the best doctor from Tucson," Drew promised when she confessed her fears. And Rosa delivered babies for 20 years before coming to work here. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Nora remaining active around the ranch until her advancing condition made certain tasks difficult. The hands built a cradle of polished mesquite wood, while Rosa knitted tiny garments and dispensed advice based on decades of experience. In the spring of 1886, as wildflowers carpeted the normally arid landscape around White Creek, Nora gave birth to a son they named Arthur, after Drew's father. The delivery was difficult but without complications, and when Drew first held his son, the look of wonder on his face was something Nora knew she would remember until her dying day. "He's perfect," Drew whispered, placing the swaddled infant in her arms, "just like his mother." Parenthood brought new challenges and deeper joys to their life at White Creek. Arthur proved to be a robust, curious child with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. By his first birthday, he was toddling around the ranch house, bringing laughter to everyone he encountered. As Arthur grew, so did White Creek Ranch. Drew's smart management and breeding program had made their cattle highly sought after, allowing them to purchase additional acreage and expand their operations. Nora's head for numbers became an asset as she took over the account books, freeing Drew to focus on the practical aspects of ranching. When Arthur was 3, Rosa announced her intention to return to Mexico to care for her ailing sister. "You do not need me anymore," she told Nora with satisfaction. "You are a true ranchera now, and Senor Drew looks at you with more love than ever." Though they tried to persuade her to stay, Rosa was firm in her decision. They threw a grand fiesta before her departure, bringing in musicians from Oatman and inviting ranchers from miles around to celebrate the woman who had been White Creek's heart for so many years. After Rosa left, Nora took over full management of the household, hiring a young local girl named Maria to help with the heavier work. Life continued to unfold with a richness that sometimes left Nora breathless when she remembered how close she had come to a very different fate. In the fall of 1890, As they prepared to celebrate 5 years of marriage, news reached them that rocked Nora's hard-won sense of security. Her first husband, Thomas Blackwell, had been released from prison in Montana and was reportedly heading south, telling anyone who would listen that he was looking for his runaway wife. "He can't touch you," Drew assured her as they sat before the fire after Arthur had been put to bed. "Our marriage is legal in every sense. You were presumed abandoned when he went to prison. But what if he comes here?" Nora's old fears resurfaced like unwelcome ghosts. "What if he tries to take me back by force?" Drew's expression hardened. "No one will ever hurt you again, Nora." "Not while I draw breath." Despite his reassurances, Nora found herself jumping at shadows in the following weeks, scanning the horizon whenever she ventured outside, keeping Arthur closer than usual. The specter of her violent past threatened to unravel the peace she had built at White Creek. A month later, word came from a friend in Tucson that Thomas Blackwell had indeed arrived in Arizona territory and was asking questions about a woman matching Nora's description. Drew immediately increased security at the ranch, ensuring that one of the hands was always within calling distance of the house. The waiting was agonizing. Each day brought the possibility of confrontation, each night dreams of her former life. Drew was her rock through it all, patient with her fears while maintaining his quiet certainty that they would face whatever came together. The showdown, when it finally came, was nothing like Nora had imagined. She was in the kitchen garden with Arthur, showing him how to tell which tomatoes were ripe enough to pick, when a stranger on horseback approached the main house. From a distance, she recognized the rigid posture and cold eyes that had once dominated her nightmares. "Arthur," she said with a calmness she didn't feel, "run to the bunkhouse and find Mr. Rodriguez. Tell him we have a visitor." The child, sensing her tension, nodded solemnly and took off running toward the bunkhouse where the foreman would be going over accounts at this hour. Nora straightened her spine and walked toward the house, refusing to hide or cower. Thomas Blackwell dismounted as she approached, his gaze raking over her with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "So it is you," he said, his voice just as she remembered, cold and sharp as a Montana winter. "Living the high life while I rotted in prison." "What do you want, Thomas?" Nora asked, stopping at a safe distance. "What's rightfully mine?" His hand moved to his belt where a pistol rested. "You're still my wife under the law." "No, she isn't." Drew's voice came from the porch, where he stood with a rifle held casually but unmistakably ready. "Nora Abbott is my wife, legally and in every other way that matters." Blackwell's face contorted with rage. "You stole what was mine." "People aren't property," Drew replied, echoing the words he had spoken to Nora on their first night. "Nora doesn't belong to anyone but herself." "I'll kill you," Blackwell snarled, his hand moving toward his gun. "And then I'll take her back where she belongs." "Thomas, don't," Nora pleaded, seeing the murderous intent in his eyes. "There are a dozen ranch hands within earshot. You won't leave here alive if you draw that weapon." For a moment she thought he might listen to reason. Then his face hardened into the expression. She remembered from the worst nights of their marriage a look of cold determination that preceded violence. "Better dead than living as another man's whore," he spat, drawing his pistol with surprising speed. Drew fired first, the rifle shot echoing across the ranch. Blackwell staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, his own shot going wild. Before he could recover, Drew was on him, knocking the pistol from his hand and pinning him to the ground. "Nora, get the rope from the porch," Drew called, his knee firmly planted in Blackwell's back. With shaking hands, Nora retrieved the coil of rope, returning to find several of the hands had arrived, Arthur safely behind them with Rodriguez. "Tie him up," Drew instructed the men. Rodriguez, ride for the sheriff. Tell him we've got a would-be murderer who needs escorting to the territorial prison. As the men secured Blackwell, Nora knelt beside Drew. Are you hurt? Not a scratch, he assured her, pulling her into a fierce embrace. It's over, Nora, truly over this time. The territorial judge arrived 3 days later, holding an impromptu hearing at White Creek itself, due to Blackwell's injury. The evidence was clear. Multiple witnesses had seen him draw first, and his stated intention to reclaim Nora by force violated numerous laws. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in Yuma prison, effectively ending any threat he might pose to Nora's future. As the prison wagon departed with her former tormentor, Nora felt the last chains of her past finally break. She turned to Drew, standing beside her with Arthur perched on his shoulders. You once promised me I'd know only kindness, she said softly. You've kept that promise through everything. Drew smiled, the expression lighting his entire face. And I always will. That night, after Arthur was asleep, they sat on the porch beneath a canopy of stars, Nora nestled against Drew's side. I was thinking, she said, tracing patterns on his palm with her fingertips. Perhaps it's time we gave Arthur a brother or sister. Drew's arm tightened around her. Are you sure? After everything that's happened? I've never been more sure of anything, Nora replied. Our family is what saved me, Drew. What gave me back my sense of purpose when I thought it was lost forever. I want to make it bigger, stronger. The kiss he gave her then was filled with promise and possibility, the same promise she had glimpsed that first night, when he had offered her sanctuary instead of servitude. 8 months later, Nora gave birth to twin girls they named Rose and Alice, one for the woman who had been like a mother to them both, the other for the sister whose memory had led Drew to intervene that fateful day in Oatman. As the years passed, White Creek Ranch prospered along with the Abbott family. Arthur grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's integrity and his mother's quiet strength. The twins became the ranch's joy, Rose with her practical nature, Alice with her dreamer's heart. They added another son, Benjamin, when the twins were 4, completing their family circle. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Drew surprised Nora with a journey to San Francisco, something she had longed to see since reading about it in books as a girl. They spent 2 glorious weeks exploring the city, attending the opera, walking along the bay, and behaving like newlyweds away from the responsibilities of the ranch. On their last night, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room watching the lights of the city, Drew pulled her into his arms. Any regrets? He asked, his voice soft against her hair. Nora thought of the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Oatman all those years ago, certain that life held nothing but suffering. She thought of the mail-order bride contract that had nearly delivered her to another monster, and the twist of fate or perhaps destiny that had placed Drew Abbott in her path instead. Not a single one, she replied, turning in his arms to kiss the man who had taught her that love wasn't supposed to hurt. Every step led me to you. They returned to White Creek the following week to find the ranch running smoothly under Arthur's supervision, the twins organizing a welcome home celebration, and baby Benjamin, not such a baby anymore at 12, proudly showing off a calf he had helped deliver in their absence. That night, as moonlight streamed through their bedroom window, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a desperate mail-order bride with no hope to the matriarch of a thriving ranch and family, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Drew's arms encircled her from behind, his lips finding the sensitive spot beneath her ear. "What are you thinking about so seriously, Mrs. Abbott?" "About promises kept," she replied, turning in his embrace. and kindness that healed what I thought was broken beyond repair. You healed yourself, Drew corrected gently. I just created the space for you to do it. Nora smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. The strength had always been within her. Drew had simply helped her find it when she needed it most. Outside their window, the vast Arizona sky glittered with stars, the same stars that had watched over them on that first desperate ride from Oatman. But where that journey had been fraught with fear and uncertainty, their path now stretched before them, clear and bright, a future built on love freely given and received, on promises made and kept through the best and worst of times. As Nora drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, she knew with absolute certainty that the frightened woman who had arrived in Oatman with no hope had found not just safety, but joy beyond measure. And it had all begun with 7 simple words spoken by a stranger who had become her world. You'll know only kindness now.